back Ginia Bellafante and guest Jeanne Gang.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to have Jeanne. I'm going to be very embarrassing and fangirlish talking to her, I'm sure, during this conversation. Jeanne's Aqua Tower in Chicago, I'm sure many of you are familiar with her work, has the distinction of being the tallest building in the world built by a woman. Now she's out phallicking herself by building an even taller building in Chicago. But what I think is most meaningful and impressive about her work is the way that she's really incorporated social justice work into all of her many projects. In the 60s and 70s in the United States, we had this real sense that design could solve so many social problems, right? There was Oscar Newman in Defensible Space, and we thought low-rise buildings, low-rise public housing might really work to bring crime rates down. That had mixed results. There's a lot of resistance to the idea. People think, well, no, the flow of capital to poor people solves social problems. And it kind of faded away, and we entered an era of starchitects and big egos and buildings that were purely aesthetic, where the value, the premium was on the aesthetic. And Jeanne has really brought back social mission architecture, I think, in a way that has real substance to it. And that's what's so exciting. And she's going to take us on a tour for work, and we're going to talk about some of her most wonderful projects.
Oh, thanks, Ginia. I thought I'd just start with saying that tall buildings were one of the building types that people thought didn't have any social component, but we've really been looking at how to use the balconies, how to use the common areas to make it possible for people to connect, or at least to have a visual connection to each other. This is a new project we're working on called City Hyde Park that just opened in Hyde Park area of Chicago. And so tall buildings, I think, are important too. One of the things I really care about passionately is the river and the waterways in the city. And we've been working on how to open that back up so that former industrial lands can become places for social connectivity.
I just want to interrupt you for one second. I think what's really interesting about this work is that there's so much waterfront development in cities around the country. And a lot of it is, well, we're going to plop some luxury condominiums on the water, and there is no connectivity. And then the water's just there as a place maybe to have a glass of wine and have a view. Yeah. But what was meaningful to you about making the actual waterfronts important?
Yeah, I think the Chicago has always been about there's the lake, and the river is really the backyard, of the city, similar to waterways that go through New York, and the opportunity to bring recreational activities, ecological parks, walkways, public space to the water, and giving people access for the first time was really transformational, because this water is really dirty, and you would not want to fall in the water. So there was a kind of a resistance to letting kids get out on the water and use it.
I mean, was there a pollution remediation component that went on in conjunction with this project?
Well, the people that were thinking about this, we thought that you kind of have to simultaneously let people have access to create a constituency so that people actually care about the river, and then in that way they will actually be stewards of the river. So simultaneously with actions that were happening, the EPA, for example, demanded that the city clean sewage water before and putting it back into the river. But that happened after this boathouse.
So your project was really the catalyst.
Yeah, it's part of the catalyst for the whole thing. And then, I think parks and public space are something that we all have as common, civic common areas. And so one of the parks that we worked on in Chicago was this Lincoln Park Zoo. And we made it into a biodiverse place where there's lots of different animals, not just a lawn with trees, but created almost like a zoo without cages. So animals would be attracted, but then people are attracted.
So animals from park. Urban wildlife.
Animals, if you put the right thing for animals, they'll come. So birds come there. And so the zoo uses it to talk about pond life. But I think the important thing was there, like we were asked to do iconic architecture, as you said before, like, like let's do some really cool pavilion, which we did. But the main project, I think, was about re-envisioning the whole thing outside the pavilion,
right,
so that when kids come there, there's something to actually learn about, and then it's become a super, people feel like they own this place. Things that you wouldn't even expect to happen, like that last summer was
a great story.
Dîner en Blanc. That's an event where you find out like a few hours ahead of time where the dinner's going to be, and then you wear all white and you show up and this ring the entire boardwalk around. And so it was really fun to see that, to see it used
hundreds of people.
Hundreds of people using it in a place, in a way that you wouldn't expect. But the point is that people like are attracted to this, and what we're trying to do now is to look at the American city, look at neighborhoods that are having issues, and start to, like Brownsville, for example, in New York, is a place where we just designed this fire rescue 2. It's a fire rescue facility. There's one per borough, and here it's about putting a publicly owned building and making it very open and visible, and to help revitalize that part of the city.
I want to say, for anyone in the audience who's not familiar with Brownsville, although it was mentioned during the police reform panel, it's the poorest and highest, and it's poorest neighborhood in New York City, has the highest concentration of public housing, most terrible rates of crime, and not what this will do to Brownsville is it really will bring something of aesthetic value into a neighborhood that is very, very desolate and very depressing. There are places you can stand in Brownsville and look 360 degrees and you'll only see these monolithic public housing towers. Very little new development, and I think this will be a catalyst for.
Well, and the city decided to locate this here, but there is community though in Brownsville. So when we started designing this, I think it started to develop a way of working in neighborhoods that need revitalization, or that need some love. Let's just they need some love, and this one, and so it's not just a kind of top down, like what do we think it needs. We developed a way of working with people, asking people from the community what they want to have.
And can you talk a little bit about the way you engaged firemen and what you learned about the culture and community of firemen that influenced?
Well, maybe go back one, if you don't mind, before we go into this. But if here what we really noticed was the firefighter. They're actually rescue workers, not firefighters, but they like to eat together and they stay there a few days at a time, and they really develop a community, and so they have their own strong community. But then that also makes them attractive to the neighbors. Like you feel like you trust a firefighter, a rescue worker, and those doors on the building are often open, and we even put like a bench in the front of the building so people can actually sit there, instead of taking this approach of like creating a fortress, which I think is a contrast to what we see in the design of police stations. And so really designing this Fire Rescue 2 started me thinking about, are there ways that design could help improve the relationship between community members and police if we looked at the architecture? Not that it can solve everything, but I think maybe it can be part of that dialogue in creating relationships between police and community members, which are not just the confrontational relationships.
And again, this is a neighborhood where people might be just instinctively distrustful of anyone, someone in a uniform, someone in.
Yeah, I think you see police stations that they tend to fortify themselves, and they usually don't have any windows, and they're surrounded by cars and parking. And so one of the things we did after the fire station was we wanted to think about how to design police stations to be more like community centered, and we took a hypothetical, so it wasn't a client, it was just a self-initiated project, my firm, Studio Gang, and then we didn't want to work for, let's say, the police or any specific community, but to see what those two groups had in common. So we started on a journey, and we basically went and talked to both groups independently.
Community members and cops.
And cops, individually and then together. This is one of a lot of people have been working in this way, but I think sometimes designers are afraid to engage communities directly, and including me, because, what are they going to say? Is it threatening to my aesthetic?
Right, right.
But and it really just, I liked this very much, this process, listening to people's ideas, both cops and community members, and they had great ideas. Like one of the community members said, if you want to bring us into the police station, you should actually put things in there like a barber shop, because then we can really sit down and have a talk with and other things like learning lab. This was a sketch that came out of the charrette. There was a desire to have community, because there actually is a community in this was in North Lawndale, but
a poor neighborhood in Chicago.
Yeah, a kind of a neighborhood that has high level of crime. And one of the people in the charrette said, I want a place to show off the community we do have, so that when people come in and they're arrested for a crime, they're going to be jealous that we're sitting around having this great, space. So there was so much great ideas and things that I would have never thought of myself, So I think this helped to develop our kind of a process that needs to happen when you're designing for communities. And that is to look and see what's there, look at what the assets are, and then listen to what people say, because they actually know better than we do as designers. It sounds dumb. It sounds easy.
No.
But
what,
it's very good.
You gave us the great anecdote about the guy who thought of the barbershop. What was from the cop side? Did they have as much investment in the look and the aesthetic and opening up?
Well, they have security concerns, of course, and,
right.
And that tends to, dictate. So they need more convincing. But one of the police said that they want to be coaches for teams, kids in the neighborhood, but they don't have time to they have to do it on their own time, and they have to walk far away, drive far
right.
away to go do it. So they thought of, we have all these parking lots, and when we as designers thought, well, what if we put play courts on the old extra parking lots, like a basketball court?
And parking lots are a bane in so many cities, right? I mean, their zoning laws, they require a certain number of parking spaces, and it's such wasted space, especially in a world where we're trying to rely more on public transportation.
Well, that is the white building there is the police station in North Lawndale. And look how much paved area is around it, the width of the roads, the size of the parking lots. They all work to isolate the police station from the neighborhood. And so we ended up having the idea of putting a basketball court on one of these. It's actually a half court, small steps, but the police agreed to give over part of their parking lot, and we raised the money to build on that particular site.
And you said it was incredibly easy. It took about 2 minutes to raise the money, because it was a project, everybody is so worried about this issue. Everybody's so invested in it, and you said
right.
The money came very easily and quickly.
It was really easy to do. We pitched the idea, to the city, to the aldermen, and then to some funders, and they supported it really quickly. It cost about $30,000 to do a half court.
So was it purely funded philanthropically?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think the alderman had a little bit
of $30,000 in the great scheme of what we spend in cities isn't very much money to.
Yeah, and
right.
A lot of this, we were also looking at the 21st Century Task Force on Community Policing
right.
that came out
of the Obama administration.
Yeah, a year ago, May, and looking at those policy recommendations. And trying to think of design ideas that would sync up with those policy. And so one of the most important one, I guess, was to create more opportunities for interaction and trust between police and community members. And one way to do that is through non-enforcement situations, casual contact, get to know each other.
I mean, there's an aphorism in this dialogue. You don't want somebody meeting a police officer at the point of arrest.
Right.
Right.
Right, and you want also police officers to get to know the people in the community, that's a good kid, and what is he doing over there, and like the old days, where there was more connection.
Right.
And so having these facilities, amenities at the police station could actually help. So we ended up taking those policy ideas from the 21st Century Task Force on Community Policing, and they're numbered there. There were 6 pillars. And we tried to assign design ideas to each of the pillars, like building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, health, and there's a lot of overlap between officers and community members. So how can we translate that into design? So it's not just about police station. You really have to think about. We thought of like maybe the police and also other essential city workers like teachers and nurses and firefighters could maybe get them to live back in these neighborhoods, and that would also help to fill out a lot of the vacancy that's happening.
Yeah, that's a big debate in police reform here, especially, is the divide and disconnect between the police and community largely a function of the fact that major cities can be so expensive to live. Police officers are out in the first tier, the first ring suburbs and not really a part of urban life, really.
Indeed. So, this whole work was the kind of the first step in kind of our working in an urban vein. So we do a lot of tall buildings, we do community buildings and all kinds of spaces, but really, like thinking about these areas in the city that have, of the American city that are stressed. And so since then, we have started looking at an area in Southwest Philly with the Civic Commons. So we were working through grants from the Knight Foundation and the Kresge Foundation, and we started looking at like how to make some set of rules that people could follow, other designers could use to go into any city, but using Southwest Philly. And the green part on this map, we just mapped all the areas that are publicly held, including resources like waterways, streets, but also every city has rec centers, libraries, police stations, parks, and schools. So how can we start to use those assets and network them for specific places? And one of the particular things that was prevalent there, and I think in a lot of communities, are these libraries that were built, and they are
Carnegie
libraries. Yeah, they're all over the country, but the whole function of library has changed. People aren't going there to like check out books anymore, but still, it's like this great asset. How can we rethink it and work with what's there to reinvigorate that and connect it through? In Southwest Philly, we found that this one particular library they already had this program where they were like lending ties to people to go for interviews and things like that. Lending not just books, but lending things. And also the site, if they could be just tweaked a bit, like opened up, they were oftentimes prototypes also. So when they got built, they might not have been built to be oriented to the right street, or they might not have visibility or accessibility. Oftentimes they have stairs going up and so we looked at ways to take the programs they had already there and kind of like open this library up and create a big porch, and to work with programs that they already had going on, like these music concerts, and try to like make space for those things. So I think it's a lot about, it's kind of like being a chef, like work with what you have, what's in season, and to bring it together. And it's about the combining thing. And so, as a designer, I'm really excited. I think design is more than just making the form of the building. It's also like, how do you connect these dots to make something?
Right. And as you said, libraries are changing, and they are, in poor communities, they really are centers for, in some way, providing social service. The Thai example, but also so many people in poor communities don't have internet access, and the library is the place where they can connect to social service, public assistance stuff that requires being online, but they don't have access at home. So they're really incredibly vital, not for the obvious reasons of literacy, but really for getting food stamps and all this stuff.
Yeah, we talked about too that people they want and need social interaction. So, a lot of architects' work over the last 10 and 15 years has been, what do we do about climate change? Because it's like, it's such a huge thing in resiliency, but there's also social connectivity, and I think it's a key thing to making the cities work. Think about what happens if you have a storm event, or if you have what gets broken is if you don't have social connectivity, what do you do?
Right.
So those are part of being resilient, I think, and it goes hand in hand with what we have to do for climate.
We were talking about this earlier. Why do you think so many architects have been resistant to that, to really what is the human dynamic? And there's a cold distance from actually how people live in.
I think we might be like, maybe we are like
Well, not
intimidated.
you.
Well, no, I have to, I am too, like the first time engaging communities, because, you think of a community meeting and you go in and you get hammered because you took away the parking or you did this or that, and it sets up, it's very, usually it's confrontational, but I think we need to, in studio, like when we learn how to design, we usually, as architects, we pin up our drawings. We learn how to defend our designs, but we don't actually learn how to engage community.
Right.
And I think it's a thing that everyone needs to know how to do. And so, it's the future of design.
And some of these innovative ideas are going to come up against the bone-crushing misery of bureaucracy. I mean, how do you see getting past some of that? Or how do you do it? How do you get the great police station?
Right. I think, here's the really interesting thing. Like, lots of communities have plans, urban plans, and they spend time doing, like a 10-year plan, a 15-year plan. That's urban planning. And then you have tactical urbanism, which has come up in the last few years as a way to kind of enliven something without a big budget and just get something immediately there. And I think the work that we're starting to embark on is like in the scale in the middle, where it's taking the hand off of the urban planning ideas that have already begun, and so you're like plugging into that, but looking at these, almost like this architectural scale, which I think really defines community.
Right.
And bringing some tactical urbanism strategies in, and giving communities and bureaucracies, like, kind of, here's the short term, the medium term, and the long term approach to what needs to happen. And of course, it's going to need to be revisited constantly.
Of course, right.
But I think this is really, I feel like we're getting onto something with this, this approach.
I'm sure there are lots of questions for Jeanne, so I want to open up the floor to questions. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
How do you get government officials and architects, professionals how do you get government officials and architects to kind of give up some of that authority so that there's a broader voice for the community?
I think there's a lot of people that know how to do the engagement aspect well. One of the groups that we tapped into to use was a community cafe, it's called, and they can help curate a conversation that needs to take place. I guess, to answer your question, I think part of it is that the process is the design. You are designing, if you can design a process to get from A to B. It's as satisfying. So I think that'll help to thinking about the process as a part of the design is really important. And then working with people that really know how to curate these conversations that need to happen as part of that process is key. I think in New York, there's a great program with a design excellence through the DDC, where designers are pre-qualified and they're brought in. So if a process were given to these design excellence architects to do the municipal buildings, just make it a protocol that's how it happens. And then, those conversations are happening. I think it's just a matter of getting the knowledge as a designer so you can design what people want.
Sir.
My name's Ashton Hayward. I'm the mayor of the city of Pensacola, Florida. Oh. And I'm about to build a fire station and a new community center on the water. I love your work. And thankfully, I did live up here for 10 and a half years, so I spurred my energy to do things correctly. But is there any advice you can give me so I don't make these mistakes when someone that appreciates great design and being in an area where you have to educate them? And obviously, we love the charrettes. But is there any advice you can give me? Because we now have introduced rowing on this body of water where the community center is going to be. So I want to activate that water and obviously the space where people will be perched up. So.
Yeah. I think, so again, I think this process thing is such a key part, because if you come in with a really cool design and you haven't asked anybody about it and you put it there, you know, it's not going to get, the ownership won't be there. So what I've learned is, you know, just you get those conversations happening, you listen to all the different leaders and groups, and sometimes brilliant ideas come out of that. And sometimes it's just like some people just want to be heard, like, don't forget to do this, you know. And that just has to be built into the process. And then, you know, maybe the designer comes back with a couple schemes and re-engages, because you want to touch back with the community and show that some of those things got incorporated. And then, you know, then you get this ownership, which is what the goal is, like, that people have it as their own thing. And then, so, yeah, and I like the program in New York, too, for getting good design to kind of qualify based on portfolios. And then when the project comes up, people can interview and pitch for that project, and you can select that way, but you kind of get a good group, a big, broad group of good designers to choose from.
I mean, rather than the standard, here's the idea, here's the RFP model.
Yeah, well, the standard is like, here's the RFP, and let's take the lowest bidder on the RFP.
Right.
And so, you know, just getting, as a mayor, you can get set up a process for getting good.
You're the mayor, you can do whatever you want. Rob.
Last time I had the great fortune to listen to you, it was in the Guggenheim. So that was the art department. Now it's about cities for tomorrow. My question is, where does the responsibility for an architect begins and where does it end?
Oh, for the architect, yes. Well, more and more I feel like the part of being an architect is to create the kinds of projects that you want. And so if you just wait for them to come through the door, you know, you're going to always be disappointed. So what I always found is, like, the city that I want, I'm going to do projects that help get that city there. So for the boathouse, for example, it started out as a book project about the river. About
that you were working on.
Yeah, that I was working on with the Natural Resource Defense Council, about what's problems with the river, what does it need to do. And so in a way, it was like creating the context for the boathouse to happen, and then it happened. And so I think, you know, we can take more of a role in helping to produce the projects that we want to see happen. So I think it starts, yeah, really earlier, and not just waiting for the brief. And then where does it end? I don't know. I think I learned how to row after that boathouse, so I like to start like using it.
Other questions? Anyone? No? All right, Jeannie.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's such an honor.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you very much.
Great. Well, that's it. We're at the end of the day.
It's drinking time.
Let me say, there is alcohol waiting in the lobby, and as a journalist, I would never stand before an audience and alcohol. But let me just say, first of all, thank you all so much. I have to say, my favorite thing about this conference is that it is so eclectic that it actually embodies kind of the same thing that we talk about, right? This varied